Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Ferry with the Sports and Society program at the Aspen Institute. And welcome to the Future of Sports, our conversation series focused on sports policy, where we gaze into the crystal ball best as we can and ask, what if certain big emerging ideas or proposed solutions were to take hold? How well might they help sports serve the public interest, the mission of our program? Today's conversation is on the future of college sports. It's not our first bite at this topic. In 2018, we asked, what if college athletes could market their name, image, and likeness, their NIL? That next year, the state of California gave athletes the right to do just that. That led other states to pass similar legislation, which in turn sent the NCAA to Congress, asking the federal government to get involved. So in December 2018, we asked, what if Congress developed a national solution? What would be the implications for the NCAA and college athletes? NCAA President Mark Emmert joined us for the event that day in our DC headquarters. The Future of Sports series took a break when COVID hit, but now we're back virtually for the first of 6 conversations this year. And this time, proudly, with Axios Sports as our media partner. If you subscribe to the Axios newsletter, and I encourage you to do so, as it's one of the very best out there, smart and yet somehow quick and deep, you know how much the future of college sports is up for grabs and how much has happened in the past year. Axios sports editor Kendall Baker has recapped them over the past week and will share relevant links in the chat function. Marty Fox on our team will join him. Please chime in. Just click on the chat icon. The bottom line, Congress is now involved deeply in the design of the future of college sports, just as the NCAA asked, though maybe not as it hoped. That's because as of last month, the Democrats now control the Senate, House, and White House. So bills put forth by Democrats will hold the greatest sway. One was introduced a couple of weeks ago by Senator Chris Murray and with a companion bill by Congresswoman Lori Trahan. Representative Trahan will join us during the hour to talk about her bill. But we want to start with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. His College Athletes Bill of Rights was introduced last year with 3 other senators. It's 63 pages and goes well beyond NIL, proposing a sweeping overhaul of college sports that includes health and safety protections and revenue sharing like in professional sports. Senator Booker played college football, a tight end at Stanford. He's seen the flaws of NCAA-style amateurism up close, how not every athlete, especially those from less advantaged homes, benefited as he did. How many were left without degrees, with broken bodies, broken minds, and broken spirits. I saw the same when I was an investigative reporter with ESPN and other outlets. But how much of the Booker bill how much of it actually takes with others is not just a matter of what's right and fair, it's a matter of politics, what he can sell to his fellow lawmakers. And those lawmakers are hearing from the NCAA that the very institution it governs is threatened if major changes are made in its model. In the words of NCAA Chief Operating Officer Donald Remy, quote, "Some would say they erode and undermine the NCAA's ability to maintain student sports," unquote. So let's explore that notion. Senator Booker, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Off the top here, tell us, what are the key features of your bill?
Well, look, I want to even take a bigger step back and just let folks know that this is a time, the NCAA is right about the challenges that we'll face if we don't have some universal standards. But before we start talking about all of these things, which is the money, which is important, name, image, and likeness, or revenue sharing. I just want us to start to address the things that have been unjust in college athletics for years. I just got off with another coach who sends lots of, working at a junior college, sends lots of young talent into colleges, and the stories of athletes being exploited who produce literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth, but are often left disproportionately without an education, with injuries that plague them for their entire life, but yet they have to pay out of pocket for them, and many other challenges that they face. And so for this sport to have to be shamed into doing things, you remember when Shabazz Napier, at the height of his win of the NCAA Final Four says to the public, I go to bed hungry many nights because you have many young people who get scholarships and are stuck in this world where there are jerseys being sold with their name on it for more money than their a parent or or mother or father can make in a full day's work, and yet they can't even get their parents out to watch them play. This is exploitation. It is putting too many young people's health at risk and sacrificing what they claim to be about, which is about educating athletes and giving them pathways to lifetime success. And so my personal experiences and frustrations that these issues have not been addressed for decades are things I've been addressing since I got into the Senate. In fact, my first year in the Senate, on the Commerce Committee, we had Emirates in, and I found myself getting very emotional because I had bottled up decades of watching, or almost 2 decades of watching, what happened to a lot of great athletes. And he made a lot of acknowledgement of the problems I was pointing out, but then nothing changed. And so now we have leverage because they are facing a threat to their revenue model, frankly. And it gives me a chance in my position in the Senate, along with a lot of great Senate partners, to say, well, we are not going to settle these issues unless you make commitments to the health and safety for athletes. So our Bill of Rights starts there. It puts at the center of the NCAA protections for the health and safety of each and every player, and does things like work to protect, to create an insurance fund for guys that might be, men and women who might be suffering from spinal injuries later in their lives directly from their play. Knee injuries, as you and I probably both know, a lot of people who have lots of problems with ACLs, ankles, other joints, just to make sure that there is protections there. It has insistence on protocols for everything from concussion to sexual assault, which the NCAA still is not doing what they should be doing to protect the health and safety of players. It gives them lifetime scholarships. The coach who I was just talking to, great coach, was just saying that there was this coaching staff that transferred. And by the way, we want to address transfer rules. And now the new coaching staff came in, didn't want to honor the players that were there, their pathway to their degrees. And so we need to fix these things. And I would be wrong not to point out some of the racial disparities that are inherent in all of this as well. The revenue generating sports are disproportionately Black and brown players who create extraordinary wealth. The highest paid government employees in the majority of our states are coaches for football and basketball. And the people literally, in the case of football, in the fields doing the work, creating millions of dollars of revenue for people that often sit on high and watch them. They don't see what I think should be a better share of the revenue. So that's sort of just the broad strokes of this. And as you, I think, pointed out, in a 50-50 locked Senate, every senator has even more power. And I'm telling folks right now that I will not let a lot of these money issues be settled until the safety of college athletes, their well-being, their education, these issues are addressed. And they should have been addressed years ago. And the NCAA has given lip service to these things, but for shame that they have not taken actions to secure athletes' safety and stop them from what I consider just exploitation.
Yeah. So what parts of the bill do you think will be the easiest to get passed, get support for?
Well, that's the great thing. I mean, I have a lot of good friends on both sides of the aisle, and when I talk to them about, true stories about people with health injuries, or about, when I was playing, and it really hasn't changed, even though they have ostensibly limits on the hours we should be spending on our sport. I mean, I had playbooks, trying to figure out how to break USC's defense that were more difficult than some of my calc books. So you're spending 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and should have a better pathway to a degree. So when I tell people these stories of athletes, there's a lot of sympathy on both sides of the aisle. So, we've had some negotiations, preliminary discussions, negotiations already. And I think a lot of these basic health and safety things are going to be a part of whatever change we make when it comes to NIL and potentially increased value of the scholarship, which I think is something that really should be the case as well.
Right. So health and safety, NIL seems to have already, I mean, there's a fair amount of support for NIL regardless. What about the revenue share piece?
So that's important to me because I think that, and first of all, it wouldn't affect the overwhelming majority of colleges that are out there. It wouldn't affect colleges that aren't making significant revenue. And that's how we have it modeled. I think that's going to be a hard win. And I think there's more an appetite to expand the scholarship above and beyond, or calling it things like stipend or what have you. But it's something I believe in, and will be part of whatever grand negotiation as we go forward on the Senate side. I know you have an extraordinary congresswoman on after me, one a rising star in our nation. But I know for the Senate negotiations, we'll put it on the table and try to see how far we can get. And I want to be specific about this because you were out in the Pac-10 before it was Pac-12, and you and I both could name athletes that put seats, excuse my language, butts in seats. People came out to see them that never had NFL careers. So these were their peak earning years. Mm-hmm. And then they ended up not going into the NFL and having far more humble careers. And to steal from them where they could have made revenue off of that, for them having no part of the revenue that they created is problematic to me. In and of itself. And I don't know any other industry in America, multi-billion-dollar industry, where the peoples whose athleticism and artistry, whose work and sweat and sacrifice is driving the revenues for that, see none of the benefit of that whatsoever. It's sort of an unconscionable reality that you're stealing some of the best years of their lives. And often they're not even ending up with a college degree as a result of it, or being told, like the athletes I was talking about with this coach this week, that they'd have to, they're these credits short, they have to pay for them themselves. That's insane to me.
Yeah, and especially given that the athletes, like you're saying, who are making the money are often African American, and there's a sort of this wealth transfer to athletes and administrators who are not. There's the racial dynamic to it, or otherwise, which I can totally appreciate. But let me ask you, Senator Barker, what's the timeline for advancing it? I mean, given everything that's going on in the Senate, with the Supreme Court's review of the Alston case, which will weigh in on whether NCAA style amateurism, their rules violate antitrust law, with the state actions that could come online, starting with Florida as early as July 1. What's the timeline for your bill?
Yeah, well, I'm still a relatively new senator, but I see how Senate things move very quickly when there are external deadlines or forcing mechanisms that get the gears of the Senate and the House moving. And so in this case, as a college football fan, there are real challenges coming with the next recruiting class, because you have states like Florida whose NIL legislation takes effect on, I think, July 1st of this year, which would mean that if I'm a Florida school, if I'm Miami, I suddenly have an advantage over other schools in my conference in attracting the best talent, because as a guy who I still think I am in America, the most overrated high school football player in the history of high school sports. I was a two-position All-American in my day. I got into Stanford, as I often say, because of a 4.0 1600. 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards. I just know that if you were telling me I could come to this school and have a summer camp named after me, and where I'm coaching kids, they're going to have a recruiting advantage. So that's the forcing mechanism. And the great thing about being a senator is that, if you love University of Mississippi, if you love University of Alabama, and you are the senator from those states who happens to love that, you don't want certain schools have an advantage over you. So there are a lot of senators that feel very motivated right now to strike some kind of deal and get something done. And again, there's compassion and love and respect for college athletics on both sides of the aisle. And I'm hoping this is going to make for us our ability to get something done here. But again, I'm going to stick my gum in the works if it does not include protections for athletes.
Yeah, no, but I mean, this isn't something that will get done in the first 100 days of the Biden administration, right? It's probably a May, June at the earliest kind of thing.
Yeah, don't underestimate our ability to take all the time that we have up to the final hours of a deadline. I've seen that happen more times than not. So I would say if there is a July 1st taking over, I don't think this is something that starts moving until spring, summer. But I do think that this is something that none of us are immune to capturing our attention, because this is not just a $15 billion industry. This is the culture of our country. Sports, as a guy who believes in everything from social justice and sees what athletes are able to do for racial justice and social justice, all the way to some of the best moments of my life. You give me a moment, the older I get, the better I was. I'll tell you about our Stanford beating Notre Dame in South Bend when they were ranked #1 and we weren't even ranked. And, it wasn't touchdown Tommy Bardell, if I have my memory correct. It was me that scored all the touchdowns. So, this is such a powerful cultural force. I can see from the White House's attention to others for us to get this right before it inexorably changes.
Yeah. So, I mean, given that, I mean, how do you think the consumer or the fan experience will change if your bill or some portion of or some general concept of your bill, gets approved? I mean, because this is the primary argument of the NCAA, right? At least in the court of public opinion, is that you're messing with a treasured cultural institution. So, I mean, can you guarantee? I went to the University of Florida. Can you guarantee me that the Gators are still going to play the Seminoles on a fall day, and
Well, I predict that Stanford will win the Big Bowl this year, so that's one thing I can. It's so much for my guarantees right there. But come on, we have heard this before, right? Doesn't this sound very similar to the arguments that were made against Olympic athletes being able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness, and more? I mean, I heard these before in my lifetime about how it was going to undermine amateur competition, so on and so forth. So I actually just disagree. I think that we can make for rules that protect and affirm the safety, security, education, and financial well-being of college athletes and still have the best of competition that we all enjoy. We can do this. The problem with the NCAA is it often does not move until it has to. And if they want, I believe it's really the NCAA. If things go south, no disrespect to the Southern schools that you just mentioned, but if things go south, it will be the NCAA's fault because they were unwilling to compromise on things that would benefit their athletes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So your bet is that the fan and the consumer experience really won't change. It'll just be the underlying economics and protections for the players.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's the Harvard-Yale game or Stanford beating Cal this year in the big game on the West Coast. I just think that these traditions are so valuable, so important that they shouldn't change, and they don't have to by allowing athletes to control their name, image, and likeness, to share in some of the incredible profits that comes from having that game on national TV and more. I don't think it's going to. People are telling me, "Oh, this is going to endanger the non-revenue generating sports at some of these Power 5 conferences." That's not true either. There's enough money in this $15 billion industry that's making many people multimillionaires to ensure that college athletes see some revenue and still be able to afford revenue for other varsity sports. There's a way to do this. And I'm just sorry if people are blinded by, I don't know what the arguments could be, greed, that they should hold all the resources to themselves here. I just don't understand how you could defend the indefensible. That there are people getting hurt, there are people not getting education, and there are people who are giving up their some of their most valuable earning years, and that does not have to be the case.
Mm-hmm. What about like a competitive balance? I mean, if we move to this model, I mean, will certain programs get the best players? Will we see even less parity than we see right now?
Well, let's examine that for a second. As far as me controlling my name, image, and likeness, whether I'm a big fish in a smaller pool, standout star, and maybe not one of the Power Five, but maybe I go to one of our top leagues and stand out even more. I think actually that could make me more opportunities to use my name, image, and likeness. So I don't see that as a problem. If we create a revenue sharing model that is equitable, so that a women's basketball player is making more money than the scholarship is right now, I don't see how that would give advantage if you created a common system in which players get this kind of share of the overall revenue from NCAA sports. So I just don't see that. If we design it right, there are easy fixes to this idea that suddenly, University of Alabama would have more dominance over the extraordinary excellence we know that is Stanford University.
Mhm. What about player retention? I mean, will players stay in college longer because they don't feel the need to jump to the pros to make money, or will they jump from college to college more often to chase better opportunities? Might that player leave Mississippi State and go to USC because it's a bigger market? I mean, can we see even more? I mean, how do you see it impacting the movement of players?
Well, so remember, the lion's share of players in the revenue generating sports do not go to the pros. And so this idea that they would have a better life experience, they would, during their peak earning years, get more revenue, have more income that they can invest, that they can save, that they can put away for their families to create that generational wealth. These are all exciting things for the majority of football and basketball players. That would be their story. So, jumping to the pros for those fraction of people that do that, God bless them for having that opportunity. As I tell Emmett Smith when I see him, he and I were both on the same high school All-American team. I gave up all of that to serve the people. Had no real shot, frankly, but God bless those that can do that. But I think it actually would enhance the college experience, and make people stick around. And by the way, they would get their degrees because they would have pathways to doing that. As far as transferring, I've always found the transfer rules, I hate to use such a strong word, but offensive, that a coach could recruit me for this team, then he gets to jump over to another college, and me, who now has a different coaching regime that may not run the same offense for me, so suddenly I'm not obsolete in my style of being a quarterback, for example, and I can't leave and follow that coach because the rules on me are different. And by the way, he's earning millions of dollars, and I'm now not even going to play, don't have a shot at the pros, and so on. So it just seems to be so unfair. So I hope that there's better transfer rules. The NCAA has given lip service to cleaning that up, but has still failed to do that, which is just utter hypocrisy to me. So
Right.
I don't think it's going to create as much change as people might think.
Gotcha. What about the downstream impact on high school and youth sports? Right, and we're starting to hear this from the National Federation of High Schools. They're like, oh boy, if this NIL stuff comes in colleges, or what kind of can of worms does that open up for us? How should people think through?
So look, I don't understand why we're creating a different standard for athletes. Like at Stanford, I was during the dot-com boom, and I'm seeing guys, in their dorm rooms starting businesses and profiting off of their particular genius. And so why do we create suddenly a different standard for some genius high school student who has other things that they can market that's not sports? But suddenly, if you're a football or basketball player and have another type of particular genius, oh my gosh, we're suddenly all worried about you making money. I just don't get it. And I watched classmates of mine become millionaires in college, while people who were making millions of dollars from the NCAA, they couldn't share in their wealth. But people who were doing a lot of other things at Stanford were able to become very wealthy very quick. So I just don't understand why we infantilize college athletes and yet have space for other young people to show excellence that is valued in the marketplace. So it just frustrates me, frankly.
Gotcha. And finally, because I know you got to run here, just a little more detail about this argument that if athletic departments must share revenue with players, the impact that will have on supporting non-revenue producing sports. I mean, if we go to this model, are we going to see? Look, you went to Stanford, eliminated a number of sports recently. Are we going to see how do you look at that argument?
So let me just be more detailed then. Our bill basically says that if you're a revenue generating sport, you share 50% of the profit with the athletes from the sport after accounting for the cost of scholarship. So for example, if you're a Division I basketball women's basketball players, they would receive 50% of the total revenue generated by their play after deducting the cost of scholarships awarded to all Division I women's basketball players. And so, again, if you go to and I've traveled around, obviously, in my day, to sports facilities that rival the luxury of professional sports teams. And so I see the tens and tens of millions of dollars schools contribute to fuel these athletic organizations. So if you have a model that necessitates this as an expense, I do not think this argument that we're going to have to stop other sports is really that viable. I don't hear that argument when they're paying coaches multi-million-dollar salaries. I don't see that argument when they're building luxury facilities, from luxury boxes to some of the best weight rooms in all of sports. And so this idea that an industry that generates $15 billion does not have the resources to give some kind of more fair compensation to the athletes that are actually creating that wealth, to me, it's just not confronting the realities of dollars and cents. And so the thought that this is what would have to be sacrificed, the water polo team would have to be thrown overboard by a university that has, spends millions and millions of dollars just on coaching salaries is a little bit that you've lost your sense of priorities then as a university, if that's the equation that you're making. It is time for us to end an industry that the people creating incredible wealth are often left with their bodies injured, without a college degree, with their best earning years now behind them, and ultimately exploited, while other people, and be disproportionately Black and brown folks, and other people have created generational wealth for their families on the backs of their labor. That just has got to stop.
Good. Well, that's a good closing argument. Thank you, Senator Booker, for joining us. We're going to let you go now. We'll talk to you down the road. Okay. I'd like to now introduce John Solomon, editorial director for our program and a former college sports reporter for CBS. But before John takes you through the rest of the program, I want to introduce a live poll question that everyone can vote on. And that would be, how do you think fans will respond if NCAA athletes are given new rights to market themselves for compensation? Would fans be more interested in college sports? Would there be less interest in college sports? Or would it not make a difference? So over to you, John.
Great, thanks, Tom. Great discussion, Senator Booker. Glad we found him in the Zoom world. So thanks for that. We're going to transition now to a conversation with U.S. Congresswoman Lori Trahan. But first, I want to give you all just a little bit more time, continue to vote, and we want to see what your results look like for fan interest if college athletes can market themselves for pay. So if you want to get your results in there now, that'd be terrific. And then we can call up our results here, if our team can put that up. So 37% of you say more interest in college sports, 11% so far say less interest, and 52% say no difference. So a lot of you think more or no difference, which is it's really what a lot of the arguments have been from a lot of plaintiffs in a lot of the college athlete lawsuits through the years. want to introduce now Congresswoman Trahan from the 3rd District of Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us. She recently joined with Senator Chris Murphy to introduce a bill called the College Athlete Economic Freedom Act. And this bill would allow college athletes to profit off their name, image, and likeness, and to organize in order to create group licensing deals. The Congresswoman is also a former college volleyball player at Georgetown University, so she's seen firsthand how the NCAA amateurism model works. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first, can you talk a little bit about how does your bill differ from the College Athlete Bill of Rights that we just heard from Senator Booker?
Yeah, no, I believe that our aims are similar. I mean, we simply want greater opportunities for student athletes. And whenever I consider any policy questions that touch the education space, I always assess whether it would raise or lower the value proposition for students. I mean, fundamentally, their needs must be our highest priority. I was lucky enough to get to go to college on an athletic scholarship. In fact, I was the first in my family to graduate from college, a dream that my grandparents from Brazil and Portugal and my parents all shared. But the truth is, growing up in Lowell, the daughter of a union iron worker, I could have never afforded tuition at Georgetown if it weren't for my volleyball scholarship. Certainly going to Georgetown opened up so many doors for me. It really broadened my horizons, and playing volleyball was the ticket to the opportunities that arose from that education. So while it was a tremendous amount of work, it was also a labor of love, and those memories are precious to this day. That said, the bargain between student athletes and colleges has really shifted profoundly in the direction of the latter. As Senator Booker said, college sports is a nearly $15 billion industry, and yet the student athletes aren't seeing more than pennies on the dollar for their efforts. And that's why I got involved. I think it's time to level the playing field. I mean, if you look at the TV revenue that has come into play over the last 40 years, it's obvious that these students are creating more wealth than they are reaping. Setting aside last year, we've seen the NCAA rake in $1 billion in revenue. And the rise in multi-million-dollar contracts for coaches for a sport played by so-called amateurs is just icing on the cake. So there are 100 or more Division I coaches who earn at least $1 million annually. And in dozens of states, the highest paid public employee is a coach. So our bill, the College Athletes Economic Freedom Act, which Senator Chris Murphy and I introduced, is a response to that imbalance. It's actually pretty simple and it's straightforward. It would guarantee in federal law that college athletes have all rights to their names, images, and likenesses, full stop. These athletes could join together for group licensing agreements, a tool that I think will be especially valuable for our young women and their sports, since their sports don't typically generate the same amount of revenue. And if those NIL rights are infringed upon, then the student athlete can go to court and sue for damages. As I understand Senator Booker's bill, the College Athletes Bill of Rights, it's quite a bit broader than the legislation Chris and I filed. The Booker bill includes a version of NIL rights with some limited exceptions, but also addresses revenue sharing and ensuring healthcare coverage for athletes, for example. And I commend him and all of his work, his lived experience, certainly, his partner, who is my friend and colleague, Chairwoman Jan Schakowsky, for tackling all of these issues in such a comprehensive manner. Our approach is a bit narrower for both tactical and strategic reasons. I definitely wanted written it in a way to make it likely for the House parliamentarian to give it a referral to the committee I serve on, which is the House Energy and Commerce, plus establishing this right in law in combination with what is happening in a number of states should incentivize the NCAA to produce a more equitable product on their own.
So you touched on women's sports, and I think a lot of people, some people may not understand that names, image, and likeness actually really could benefit female athletes as well, and in some ways, maybe even more so. What impact do you think your bill has on women's sports, both in terms of athlete rights and being able to benefit, but also to Tom's questions earlier of Senator Booker, would there be concerns of universities cutting sports because they may not be getting as much revenue, since some of it could be going to the athletes.
Yeah, well, so the first part of your question, it's the primary reason I'm involved. And women's athletic groups like Voices in Sports are also involved. It's because we believe that this will benefit women's sports at all levels. Apart from the opportunities like the WNBA draft or the Olympics, there generally isn't a lot for women athletes after college. So if NIL helps to attract eyeballs to women's sports at the collegiate level, then it should offer more opportunities for women, whatever they ultimately choose to do. Now, some people might imagine that only quote unquote superstars would benefit from NIL rights. But to borrow an example from my days at Georgetown, they can easily imagine someone like Allen Iverson being able to get a good payday off of NIL. And look, there is no doubt that great talent will mean greater marketability and greater monetization. But this is not a fixed pie, or at least it needn't be. As it stands, there are billions of dollars coming in thanks to young people who are splitting their time between classes and training, but not really getting benefits in proportion to their contributions. And how do we know this? Well, we've had an almost natural experiment running recently. You may have read the excellent piece in the Times last November about collegiate cheerleaders sponsoring products and earning money as social media influencers, or I think they were called cheerlebrities. Many of these young women are, they're absolutely astonishing athletes. It's a sport in its own right, but it's not governed by the NCAA. Quite the same way. But what it does signal, or at least it signaled to me, is in fact there is a market for athletes beyond the stars we watch during, March Madness or bowl season. As far as equitable access to school-sponsored, marketing assistance, our bill specifically includes a provision to require equitable institutional support regardless of gender, race, or sport. And I don't note also that our bill provides for annual reviews of that monetization of NIL by gender, race, and sport, and even suggests remedies if and when disparities appear. I'll give you an example just from my, experience, one that would have positively impacted women student athletes like myself. When I was playing volleyball at Georgetown, I was prohibited from working at skills camps during breaks and summer months because it would have violated my amateur status. And since time is, so constrained for student athletes, I had to make money during those summer months. So I spent those precious summers waiting tables at TGI Fridays, for example, rather than make a few $100s while serving as a positive role model for our young women. So, with all the harm that the internet culture, can do, especially to warping, young women's self-image, I think NIL seems like a way to restore some degree of choice, control, fairness, and positive role models.
So your bill is silent on a couple items I wanted to ask you about. And it's frequently discussed around NIL rights. One, the possibility of university and athletes having contracts together. Two, should there be like fair market value guardrails around that? And then three, would the scope of NIL rights include live broadcasting revenue? Where do you stand on those items?
Yeah, it's ours is narrow, and it's because look, there are many state deadlines coming up, and there should be a universal standard so that those rights are given to our student athletes. I think that there's going to be a lot that we learn as a result of moving forward. When some things that we're seeing right now, the UAW is helping to organize student employees, teaching assistants specifically around the country. And there could be calls for them to do something similar, or an organizing function around student athletes. I mean, we had the case of the Northwestern student athletes a few years ago. That didn't come to fruition due to an NLRB decision. But we have a new administration, and they could take a fresh look at this. More broadly, it's a simple fact that our nation has always had a greater distribution of prosperity and economic opportunity when we've had representation and a balance. And that's been, mostly replicated through our unions. And when you look at the consequences, whether it's of CTE on football players, for example, they've been tragically demonstrated over and over again. What do we need to do for the kids who are injured and left worse off after college than they were when they enrolled? So I think that there is going to be a lot of areas where we learn as a result of granting this right to our students. And I think one of the things that we put in our bill is this opportunity to come back and look at the effects and then tweak as we go. And it also gives a forcing function, as Senator Booker said, for the NCAA to also make equitable decisions in lieu of some of these deadlines and this forcing function.
Yeah, real briefly. So regarding those deadlines, how do you see this playing out in terms of crafting one bill, and when do you think it happens? Recognizing the July 1st Florida date is coming up, and recognizing, look, Congress has some pretty pressing issues right now around the pandemic and the economy to address.
That's absolutely right. And, I haven't been here quite as long as Senator Booker, but, he was right when he said that, these things can move when there's a deadline looming. In fact, much of what we're doing right now in Washington around delivering more COVID relief is because there is this very clear deadline in the month of March. Look, right now, there are a lot of priorities on our plate, given a new administration, a new Congress, and what the American people really demand right now is that we focus on this pandemic, getting through it, making sure, we're saving lives and distributing a vaccine equitably, and then also recovering our economy. But we have committee structures in place for a reason, and that's so that we can mark up bills and get to work on a whole host of issues and bring those items to the floor. So we're going to be pressing for this because of these summer deadlines, and we'll work to make sure that NIL is put into law, and that so that we can always improve the value proposition for our student athletes.
Congresswoman, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and best wishes to you.
Thanks so much. You take care.
Great. We now for our final panel, and just so you know, we're going to go a little bit over 3, just of our delay in the beginning, but hope you all will stick around. I want to turn now to 2 people to talk about how safety standards and athlete pay could practically play out in college sports after we've heard about the legislative ideas. First, we have Tony Franklin. He's a longtime college football coach who recently retired as Middle Tennessee State's offensive coordinator. And he's seen firsthand some of the health risks associated with football, and he knows how recruiting works. We also have Blake Lawrence. He's a former Nebraska football player and now CEO of Open Doors, which is an athlete marketing platform. And Open Doors will soon be connecting college athletes to marketing opportunities once new rules go into effect. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it. Tony, I want to start with you because I think the conversation about paying college athletes isn't happening in a vacuum separate from health. When the pandemic started, lots of college sports administrators and university administrators said a couple things. 1, if there are no students on campus, there's no sports. 2, they'll never play in a bubble like pro sports. And 3, athletes are safer on campus than at home. And what we've had for many months is the general student body has largely done remote learning. College athletes are isolated on campuses, and the games, whether for better or for worse, have gone full speed ahead, given the industry's need to collect revenue. And there will even be a bubble for the NCAA basketball tournaments next month. You've spoken publicly about how risky you thought it was playing college football this past season, given some of the violations of COVID-19 protocols you say occurred at Middle Tennessee. Can you just briefly tell us, what concerned you the most? What was your experience like?
Well, the biggest thing is that I think that the university on paper had great intentions. You know, there was a really good plan that was written out. And when the players came back, if we had followed the protocol the way that it was written, I don't think that we would have had nearly the problems, nearly the issues that we ended up having. Most of the time, university officials, in my experiences, do a really good job with putting things down on paper. The problem is that when you then put a football coach in charge of that, and you also say we're getting ready to play a football season, and a couple of weeks you go through the routine and the idea of following this new protocol, and it's unique and it's different, and it calls for you to do things that you've never done before in your history as a coach, then eventually things started to slide at Middle Tennessee State University. And what happened from there, one of the things you said, John, that stuck out to me is that the idea is that players would be safer with us than they would be back at their home. Well, in our case, where we tested the players when they all came back to the university, without exception, I think of over 100 players that we eventually tested coming back, I believe there was only one that when he came back tested positive. And then within the next 30 to 60 days, we had an outbreak that was outrageous. And the reason was not because it wasn't planned, not because it wasn't written up properly. The problem is you had football coaches, strength coaches in charge of doing something that they probably didn't even believe in. You get into the world of tough guys and macho and wearing a mask, and all of a sudden following these protocols that would have been completely against their normal nature, they just couldn't do. The players in college athletics will do what you want them to do as long as you're a good leader. They will follow your lead. We just very simply at that university did a horrible job in the leadership department.
So look, one of the proposals in the College Athletes Bill of Rights from Senator Booker and other senators is for the Health and Human Services and the CDC to consult with the NCAA to create health and safety standards for college sports. There may even be, if it were to be passed, fines or individual bans, associated with violations. Is that a good idea? What impact do you think government oversight could have on college athlete health?
Well, I think it depends upon where the government oversight comes from, because what you eventually get into is the political nature of it. To me, if you did this, it would have to be from the federal government other than state governments, because every state government followed politically. If you look at the way that football was played this year, it was following the political climate in that state. So I think it's a good idea, as long as it's a universal policy to where state politics don't get involved in making a decision that is for the health and safety of your student athletes. I do believe that outside eyes need to be on every university program. But when I say outside eyes, I'm talking about people that would not be paid by the university, that would be from outside the university standards, because once the university gets involved, in my opinion, you're always going to have cover up from there.
Blake, let's bring you into this conversation. I want to talk some about name, image, and likeness, which you're an expert on, and in some form, it's likely going to come to college sports in the near future. You told me you've estimated that NIL will be a $100 million market, essentially, in its first year, and grow to $527 million by 2024. How much money are we talking about that individual athletes can earn, and what factors do you think will determine how much they make?
Yeah, certainly. If you look at that prediction is really looking at the trends in professional sports today. If you look across the globe and the relative earnings of professional athletes from off the field, right? Their sponsorship, endorsement opportunities, as well as licensing and merchandising revenue that professional athletes receive, it's equal to about 10% of the sponsorship revenue that's generated by the league in which they play in or the governing body in which they're a part of, right? So if you look at the world of college sports and the $5 billion a year that come in through licensing and sponsorship revenue into college sports, it really adds up pretty quickly that if athletes are able to capitalize at an equal share as their professional peers, then you could look at a $500 million a year type market rather quickly. Now, a larger amount of that will be top heavy, right? If you look at the spread of revenue in college sports today, NCAA Power 5 institutions have the lion's share of that revenue. And I think that would probably for the most part, follow trend with student athlete earnings, that those in the Power 5 schools would be earning the most. But the ultimate equalizer is the rise of influencer marketing, as Lori spoke about earlier, and the ability for each individual athlete to use their online persona to develop a brand. They can ultimately get paid, $1,000 for a post on Instagram. And we see athletes making today 6 figures for one post on social media and beyond. So it just depends on how large of an audience these student athletes can build, and that'll have a tremendous impact on their market value and opportunity.
And how do female athletes factor into this? Because we was talking earlier with Lori about this. I think a lot of people don't quite understand that, particularly early on, and if they have strong social media followers, there are a lot of female athletes who could really benefit from this, from NIL.
Certainly, John. And I know this is something that we get asked quite a bit. And at Open Doors, what we have is nearly a decade's worth of data on how much professional athletes actually get paid for endorsement deals, specifically online social media endorsement deals. And we can use that to get an estimate of the value of anyone online, right? So John, if you want to know how much your tweets are worth, I'll let you know, right? But
not too much.
Tony's going up. Tony's going up after today. I tell you that his value is great. But one example that I like to use is if you told me, if you had said, hey, Blake, who's going to generate the most revenue in the first year of NIL? One of the first 2 people that come to mind are the Cavender twins. These are twin basketball players at the Fresno State. They're sophomores on the basketball team. And we did an analysis back in September before they had started the basketball season out there. And they were estimated to be about $326,000 a year that they could earn through their social media promotions, right? They've got a very large presence on TikTok, 2 million followers on TikTok, 50,000 plus subscribers on YouTube, right? And we checked in after the season that started, their value had risen to 527,000. So you're talking about 2 female sophomores in the Mountain West Conference that could be making $500,000 a year in the first year of NIL, simply because of the online presence they've developed.
So Blake, in what ways do you think these athletes are going to try to build their brand? And by the same token, what are the implications? Because we've often heard from college athletes, hey, I just don't have enough time, right? If I'm spending 40 hours a week, let's say, on my sport, and also got class and maybe other things they're doing, what are the implications also for how much time and effort it will take for them to make it work, whether it's maybe they need people behind the scenes to help with marketing or taxes or whatever.
Certainly. Well, one thing, welcome Rio, my cat, to the live stream here. You can see him right in frame. So, but Tony, I'll tell you this, to answer your question, John. Tony, last time you were in a college locker room and you just browsing in, you're not trying to give a speech, how many of those players had their head down on their phone, right? Every single one of them, right? So John, the tools in which these athletes need to use to build up their online brand, they're already using it. There's a switch they can flip on those channels that allows them to make money. They've just never been able to flip the switch. Now, what's going to be interesting is now in the competitive balance of college sports is that these institutions are going to start investing in helping those athletes build up their online presence, their online value, because this will become a major function of the recruiting battle that you have across college sports. Is if you go to this school, they help you build up a bigger and better brand to monetize on a much higher level. And so it will be one that the athletes already have time. They're already using the tools. They get to flip a switch. But now once that switch is flipped, the schools that help invest in those athletes and building up that audience are the schools that are going to attract athletes that want to have a higher earning potential while in college.
And real quick, Blake, I mean, will they be hiring people as well to help, do you think? Like writing out posts or handling taxes or marketing ideas?
Yeah, I believe that there will be an entire industry that pops up around athlete marketing in college sports and helping build up and develop that brand value as well as manage the dollars that come with it.
Tony, let's turn to recruiting. I mean, Blake mentioned it just a little bit. That's the lifeblood of college sports. You know that as a coach. How do you see this playing out on the recruiting trail? And can the NCAA meet its goals of trying to enforce some rules around NIL?
Well, I think that in recruiting, to me, it would end up playing a huge part in recruiting from here on out. And I believe strongly that the NCAA should do a really good job of staying out of it. In my opinion, this is the new frontier, which equalizes everything. And when I say that, 5, 10 years from now, I think that you have new powers in all of college athletics based upon name and likeness. Because what's going to happen is that you're going to take some programs that right now are at a disadvantage facility wise, at a disadvantage more than likely money wise from a booster standpoint, to where that there's some people still out there that are filling pockets full anyway. And what happens in this recruiting now is that you're going to have some universities that are extremely creative, put together an amazing plan, and all of a sudden there might be a non-Power 5 school that rises to prominence because of creative social media, marketing, name and likeness ideas. And I think that, in my humble opinion, the worst thing that could happen is for the NCAA to try to get involved in enforcing this and making some gigantic new standard of rules. I think the best thing they could do is just let the marketplace work for itself, because I can see Nebraska coming back to the top 10 industry again because of the fans out there that are so passionate, and a program that has always done it the right way.
No, I'll take it, John. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Blake, I mean, does there need to be guardrails? What do you think of Tony's idea, where it's kind of just a free for all, essentially?
I think it is important to understand that the goal or benefit of opening up name, image, and likeness is to help these athletes make the most of their moment, right? And it is also important to understand that as a former student athlete, I played football in Nebraska, and Tony, you've been around student athletes your whole life, is that there is a unique brand of sports that is college athletics. And so much of the challenges with recruiting and balances and fairness, and just making sure that this name, image, and likeness does not turn into a pay for play scheme, right? That prominent boosters or supporters or sponsors in certain markets are investing heavily in bringing the top talent to their school by setting up shell companies and marketing, deals that have no real merit to them. So there is a need for transparency and sunshine in the market. I do not believe in capping the earning potential of any athlete and forcing them to share it with anyone other than themselves. But I do believe in the importance of getting visibility into the source of transactions, the quantity and quality of the actual activities being performed in exchange for those dollars, to ensure that this doesn't turn into a pay for play scheme and the slippery slope of amateurism can go by the wayside rather quickly.
And Tony, college coaches are creatures of habit. I mean, they don't like change. How worried are coaches, and should they be worried about NIL coming?
Well, to me, there's two types of coaches. There's those that are out there that are anything that's going to change the way that they're used to doing things. They're going to fight it. They're going to moan and groan about it and say it's the worst thing ever, and kids just aren't the way they used to be. I believe kids are better than they've ever been since I've been coaching. And I believe that there's a new breed of coach that's out there right now looking at this, and they're going, wow, this is going to make our program so much better. This is going to make the opportunity for young people so much better. Those people will prosper, the others will falter, and that's the way the marketplace is designed. That's why we have a great country.
And Blake, I mean, aren't there, you're working with athletic departments already that are starting to think through this, and coaches who know that this is going to be a pretty valuable tool, right? What do you hear them saying?
Yep. So about a year ago, we launched the very first NIL education solution at the University of Nebraska, and the Nebraska Athletic Department has made a major announcement saying we're the first school in the country to provide dedicated resources to helping every student athlete build their name, image, and likeness value. And what's interesting about this is, if you take away the earning potential, guys, the fact that these institutions and athletic departments are now in a position to stay competitive, they're going to be making major investments in developing a life skill for every student athlete. That was, I mean, when I was at Nebraska, John, we went to a seminar and it was like, why you should not use Facebook, why you should not use Twitter, right? And it was all scare tactics, because in 2008, 2009, none of us should have been using Facebook the way we were, right? But if you think back to that moment, it's now the opposite. Can you imagine in today's society if every single enrolled student athlete left college with a decent understanding that what they say and do online has a tremendous impact on the rest of their life? And what we see at Open Doors is that most of these players, when they get to the professional ranks, like we work with 30,000 athletes and we work with all the pro unions and all that, that's when they learn about the importance of what they say online. And now, and there's just a subset of athletes that ever get there. Now, 500,000 athletes are going to have to learn day one when they get to an institution, and these schools are going to make those investments. So they're doing it to stay competitive and talk about recruiting. But a side benefit is that these athletes are actually learning a life skill that's going to last them for forever. And to me, that's one of the great outcomes of this NIL movement.
Yeah. Tony, how about the fan experience? Do you think college athletes making money will change how fans view the games in any way?
I really don't. I think that what fans will do is that from a fan standpoint, it's fickle already. If you throw an interception, whether or not you were making 10 grand from some social media deal that you had is not going to make any difference as to how much they hate you at that moment. If you are making 100 grand and you throw the winning touchdown, it's only going to make them love you more and give you more opportunities. So it's already a fickle experience for a college player, just as it is, to be honest with you, for high school players today can walk off the field and have fans yelling and screaming and cursing at them because they did something. So I don't think it'll do anything. I see no negatives in this. I see only positives in this for the student athlete, as long as people like Blake, who is, as I said privately to him yesterday, what he has done and his company has done is beyond amazing. As they're prepared for this and to prepare the student athletes how to get the most out of this and how to do it in a smart and safe way, something that could really help them in the rest of their life. Because to be perfectly honest, a college degree is great, but there's a million college degrees that you get and you walk out the door and you have no job in sight. You can walk out the door with the education that you get from this, and you can be set up to have a real new life the way that society is changing today.
And Blake, I mean, will there be more pressure on players? I mean, what does that fan experience look like? Or will fans even know how much players are making or not making if it's social media payments?
Yeah, I believe the most educated and intelligent fan bases will realize that this is going to be the way that they support their athletes and their student athletes can help develop their program and reach the next level, right? And those fan bases that have maybe moaned and groaned about whispers of money and McDonald's bags to get a recruit to go to certain schools and saying, hey, we don't do that here, we play by the rules, but they're sitting out there watching these kids fight their tails off to win a game, and they don't have a way to directly support that student athlete other than a donation to the athletic department, which ultimately doesn't get directly into the student athlete's pocket. And those things exist for the right reasons too. But the opportunity for an intelligent, informed fan base to say, when our athletes are promoting products online, when our athletes are setting up for appearances, when our athletes are signing autographs at the union, when our athletes are putting on camps and clinics, we show up, and we show up in a big way because we want to support our athletes directly. And if you know anything about today's world, is that the agents and the middlemen are really getting disrupted, and people are going straight to designating their causes and their dollars to the people they care about. Right? They're not going through big organizations. They're going direct to the source. And I think that's going to be what happens in NIL, is that athletes going and giving the dollar straight to the student athlete they want to support is going to be something that great fan bases do. And it may help change the recruiting tides in those programs that are very passionate about student athlete sport.
It's interesting. It's interesting changing dynamics. Last question for each of you. I want you to look into the crystal ball, say 10 years from now, when Nick Saban may still be winning football national championships, even at age 79. If athletes can make money off their NIL without restrictions, including group licensing, which is what several Democratic bills hope to accomplish, what do you think college sports would look like? Is it better, worse, no different? Blake, you want to take the first stab at that?
Yeah, I would say as a former student athlete, I would say the opportunity to learn what it means to properly represent yourself and enter into business agreements and the entrepreneurial nature of NIL will make the student athlete experience better no matter what. The viewing experience, as long as this does not turn into a slippery slope pay for play scheme over the next 10 years, then the brand of college athletics will be made even stronger because these athletes are able to capitalize on their economic rights or NIL rights. Right? And that's what I look forward to. And I also want to say one thing is that most of the media coverage is about the hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars that could happen in this market. But the reality is that, think back to your days in college, both of you. And if you had an extra $20 every weekend in your pocket, how much that would change your life. And that is the real impact that NIL rights are going to have, is that these athletes won't be breaking the bank, not all of them. But a few $10 bills here and there is really going to make an impact. And over the next 10 years, it'll add up to a lot of money and an entirely new industry and economy. But for the individual athlete, it's just enough to make a difference and learn a thing along the way.
And Tony, what do you think the future looks like 10 years from now if this happens?
Well, the last point that he just made is the best point, which is it makes the experience for a student athlete much better. There's been numerous times in my college coaching career to where players are working side jobs in order to be able to send money back home. There was one university I worked at to where in the summertime, the players didn't get any meal money. They only got meal money for half of the semester. And so my wife and I were buying food and making food for them during that period of time. This does nothing but enhance these people. And what I see that I mentioned a while ago, 10 years from now, I really do believe that the experience is better, but I also believe that there is a new dynamic in college athletics and the structure changes to where the power bases change a little bit, which is why there's going to be a lot of people who are afraid of this, because they can see down the road creative people will take this, run with it, and they'll have a better product somewhere else than where they do there.
Listen, thank you all both so much. We really appreciate it. Terrific conversation. And that's all the time we have for this event. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, Senator Cory Booker, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, Tony Franklin, and Blake Lawrence. Thank you to our Aspen team, Tom, Fumi, Marty, Emily, and Jennifer. Big thank you to Axios, our new Future of Sports media partner. And we encourage you to sign up for Axios's daily sports newsletter at sports.axios.com. Our next Future of Sports conversation will be in April. Stay tuned for more information on that. Look for an email from us in the near future with a replay of this discussion and a recap story. And you can also watch the replay now, as you see on the screen there at as.pn/college athlete rights. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can sign up for our monthly Sports and Society program newsletter at as.pn/pp subscribe. And this will get you information on the work we do, not only with Future of Sports, but also in youth and high school sports. So until next time, thank you very much. Take care and have a great weekend.